guys? My name is Lewis, and I'm continuing my review or my analysis of the questions series. And this video is only going to have one issue, so it'll hopefully be the shortest video that I've done so far. And I feel like it's going to be a fairly quick read through. I didn't detect as many large-scale philosophical ideas in this story. There's a few here and there, but for the most part, it's just kind of a straightforward story. And so the story opens up with this beautiful gentleman right here, who, if you remember, he was actually the killer from the first issue, the one that shot the question in the back of the head with his air gun. And so he's back in Hub City, and the issue opens up with him knocking on this guy's door. And when the guy opens the door, he ends up asking him for some candy, and the guy doesn't have any. So this guy shoots the guy at the door. This guy's name is Baby Gun, by the way. And so Baby Gun shoots the man, and then goes inside and finds the man's ice cream, pulls it out of the freezer, and starts eating the ice cream, and that satiates him for now. Meanwhile, Vic Sage is meeting Myra out in the outskirts of Hub City in a motel out there, and she's dressed up like a, for lack of a better term, like a prostitute. She's, made up very heavily. She's in disguise, and it's revealed that she actually wants to have sex with Vic after all. Which, I went on this whole thing about how noble she was for wanting to keep to her marriage vows. And even though, it's a loveless marriage and it was a marriage that she was forced into, that it was very noble for her to stick to that. And then she has to go and make me look like a fool by going back on everything, going back on what she said. Although, in a sense, she is kind of she's not really gonna stick to it, but she's gonna say something else here to kind of, basically explain why it is that she's doing what she's doing. So essentially, her and Vic end up sleeping together in the motel, and afterwards, Vic ends up asking her, why she wanted to do that. And she tells him that she is waiting for her husband's term as mayor to run out, and then she is actually going to run for mayor herself. And she wants to have one last sexual experience before she does that, because when she runs for mayor, she wants to be completely clean. She wants to have no reason, basically she wants to have nothing going on in her personal life that the media can use to get in the way of her campaign to be the new mayor. And so she kind of wants to sow her wild oats here and have this one last experience with Vic. And Vic ends up asking her, why would you want to run for mayor? It's a thankless job. You're going to be under all this scrutiny. People are going to be criticizing you all the time. They're going to be, looking into everything that's going on in your personal life. Why would you want to subject yourself to that? And initially, she actually doesn't tell him why. She's going to reveal why at the end of the issue. But from there, she ends up leaving first because this is all supposed to be discreet, and so she doesn't want, the encounter to give off any suspicion. So she leaves first, and Vic waits a little while, and then he ends up leaving. And as he's leaving, he starts thinking to himself about how, I'll just go ahead and read it. He says, "At least he didn't say that he loves her. At least," he asks himself. And so the idea there being that Vic, I think that this is part of kind of like the growth process that Denny wants to take him on. That Vic, the initial Vic, the original Vic, the one that was created by Steve Ditko, is a very intellectual sort of, like highly intellectual, like completely rational sort of figure, overly rational, I would say. That's essentially that perspective that Steve Ditko would come from with, being a follower of Ayn Rand's philosophy of objectivism. is this idea of like everything being ultra rational. Everything is either good or bad. Everything has to, everything has to make perfect sense. And I think that part of the growth process that Denny is taking the question on here is to make him into a little bit more of an emotional, or at least somebody who's a little bit more in touch with their emotions, because obviously all of us are emotional. Even people who are highly rational still have emotions. It just so happens that some of us are a little bit less in tune with our emotions, and so I think that part of the journey here is Denny taking Vic on this journey of giving in to that, to a little bit of that emotionality that's inside of him. And so he's wrestling with the idea of telling Myra that he loves her. Initially they had this purely physical relationship, and is it possible, that from that purely physical relationship, which was just about, getting pleasure, can he move from that into a situation where he actually has feelings for her? And so that's kind of something that he's wrestling with, but he doesn't really want to wrestle with it too much, and so he turns on police radio to distract himself from his thoughts. And so he ends up finding out about the murder from the opening of the issue, and so he drives over there, and he ends up meeting a cop who's outside the door, and he bribes the cop to let him in, and so he gets to kind of look around and see what happened. And the cop tells him that essentially, there was that the guy answered the door, and he was shot by an air gun. And Vic immediately recognizes, obviously, having been shot himself by that air gun, that it's Baby Gun that performed the murder. And so Vic, as he's driving out, he realizes, so the cop actually tells Vic that the guy was moving, and that he was actually going to be moving out that day. And so it was kind of like an additional tragedy, that if he had just left a little bit earlier, he would have escaped. But on his way out, Vic actually sees outside of the house of the builder of the neighborhood, whose name is Carstairs. He was the developer of the neighborhood of the suburb. He sees a moving van outside of that guy's house, and he thinks that that's rather suspicious. So Vic leaves so that he can go and report this on the news. As Vic is leaving, Baby Gun ends up going to this other guy's house. We're not told who this guy is, but he opens the door and he asks, "Hey, did Carstairs send you?" And Baby Gun's like, yep, he sent me. And he's like, "Okay, well then where's my money? And like, you're supposed to be giving me money." And Baby Gun ends up just shooting the guy and going into the guy's house and taking some like candy bars that he finds inside. And from there, he ends up calling Carstairs, the owner of the suburbs, or the developer of the suburbs, and telling him, "Hey, I killed the guy, and now I'm gonna ask you, and you're gonna have to give me more money, and if you don't give me more money, then I'm gonna kill you too." So from there, we're taken to Vic's news desk, where he comments on both murders. And the police, their official statement is that the two murders are unrelated. Sometimes the police do that right intentionally because they don't want anything to get in the way of their investigation. So they'll put out lies so that the populace, is not leaning in one way or the other. And you can't, that way the killer doesn't know if there's suspicion towards him. And but Vic decides to talk about the relation between the two murders. And so after, he's done reporting the news, his manager, the program manager, comes running up to him and starts yelling at him for editorializing. And it's funny because Vic is like Vic is perfectly okay with the fact that he editorializes. But what's funny is I think the program manager has a point in that Vic's job isn't to editorialize. His job is to report the news. But Vic has this, burning conscience inside of him that he can't just report the news. He has to always report the truth, and whatever the truth is, regardless of whether or not it's what the news is, right? So Vic is beholden always to the truth, which is obviously very commendable. And so from there, Vic is about to leave the station, and I hadn't mentioned this before because it was just mentioned briefly in one of the earlier issues, but there's this girl who works at the news station with Vic, and she keeps kind of like checking him out from the background, and it keeps getting highlighted that she's checking Vic out, and Vic kind of like checks her out, and there's this, so Vic ends up looking over at this girl, and he sees her there, and he's like, oh, that's that girl that's been checking me out. And I call her a girl because Denny hasn't given her a name yet. And so anyways, she's kind of looking at him, from the side, and Vic's looking at her, and she ends up doing this right here, which, I felt that was a little on the nose. I don't... Women, if if there are any women that end up watching these videos, if you want to comment for me whether or not you think that's a little too much, feel free to let me know. So anyways, Vic goes into a sequestered room by himself with some TV monitors so that he can do some research on Carstairs, because of the fact that he had noticed that moving van before. He's wondering whether or not this guy is involved in some way in the murder. And so he watches this video where Carstairs explains how it is that he built this suburban development, and he essentially invested his entire all of his money into this suburb, into building this suburb, into buying the land so that he could build the suburb, and it's it's this kind of passion project that he really believes in. He's kind of like a noble businessman sort of a thing, where he just wants to build houses for a community and make a good honest living doing that. And so Vic thinks, man, either this guy is truly a noble man, or he's like one of the best liars that I've ever seen. And so Vic, actually believes that the guy is on the up and up to a degree, right? But that doesn't mean that he isn't involved in the murder in some way, which we already know that he is, because Baby Gun has been in communication with him. So anyways, Vic goes to go and talk to the guy, and he ends up changing into the question in between. And when he gets there, he recognizes this guy who's guarding Carstairs. He's like an ex-military guy who would train dogs to go into tunnels in Vietnam, and now he's kind of like a bodyguard sort of a figure. And so the question recognizes, like, this guy is in trouble, because if not, he wouldn't have a bodyguard. And he ends up having this very tragic fight with the dog. So the dog ends up coming and attacking the question, and the question tries knocking him out like 2 or 3 times, but the dog, he's too tough, man. He just keeps coming and coming and coming. And so ultimately, the question has to put the dog down. Very sad. Which even the question is sad about it, even though the dog was, trying to kill him. But anyways, after he puts the dog down, the owner of the dog, the bodyguard, attacks the question. And the question has to end up fighting with him. And he ends up beating the guy up as well, with some well-placed punches to the gut and face. From there, the question goes around the back of the house, and he finds Carstairs there, the developer of the suburbs. And Carstairs is kneeling on the ground, talking to himself about how the ground is not poison, and how he had invested his whole soul into this development, and there's no way that the ground is poisoned. And so he starts eating the dirt from the ground, eating the grass from the ground, and he's trying to convince himself that the ground isn't poisoned. So the question takes some soil samples home to Aristotle Roeder, and Tot looks at the sample, analyzes it, and finds that there are indeed drug toxins in the soil, and it turns out that that's why Carstairs was able to buy the land for so cheap, because there had been this like toxin inside of the soil, which had made the place essentially unlivable until Carstairs took the chance, because he just couldn't believe the fact that there was toxins there, and he ended up building this suburban neighborhood on top of it. So Vic ends up going to report this on the news because he wants to make sure that everybody is aware of this, everybody that lives in the neighborhood is aware of this, so that they can leave as quickly as possible, just in case, just in case there is the possibility that any of them is not, already poisoned by this. And basically it's revealed that these two men, the two men that Baby Gun killed, were trying to blackmail Carstairs, they had uncovered the fact that the ground was poisoned, and so they were going to blackmail Carstairs, and so that's why Carstairs hired Baby Gun to kill them, because he couldn't let go of the fact that he had invested everything into this project, and now he lost it. And there is something to be said there about, because again, I think that Denny paints a good picture here of the noble businessman, that this guy, to a degree, had good intentions, but he let his good intentions cloud his vision, and he ended up hurting a bunch of people because of the fact that he needed to press on with his good intentions. And that obviously that's something that we can all learn from, that sometimes we might have good intentions, but just because we have good intentions, that doesn't mean that we're actually doing what's good for someone else. I've talked a little bit before about how I used to work for this nonprofit organization where we would help people in a poor community, and there was this one, in fact there was two gentlemen that both of them were homeless. One of them lived in a van, and the other one actually lived outside of our complex. We had like a grassy area in the back, and we would let him stay back there, and so he lived back there. And in both cases, me and the people in my organization tried helping these people, right down to our bones. Like, we would do all kinds of things for them that we thought was what was best for them, and ultimately nothing ever helped them. And to a degree, I think we kind of enabled them to continue down the path that they were on. And one of them, unfortunately, actually, because he was an alcoholic, he was drinking all the time, he actually walked out into the middle of the street one day completely drunk, and he was hit by a car. And I can't say that I take responsibility for that or anything like that, but at the same time, like, I do ask myself the question, did we enable him by letting him stay where we let him stay, and by giving him food and stuff like that all the time, giving him whatever he needed. We bought him a tent one time, and we would buy him food, we'd buy him bus passes and things like that. And I don't, obviously I don't know, but it's kind of a case of where we had good intentions, but the good intentions didn't really play out in the best way at all. And this is kind of a story about that same sort of a thing. And all of us, I think that the point that I'm trying to get at is that all of us should analyze just because we have good intentions, that doesn't automatically mean that what we're gonna do based on those intentions are good, is essentially the point that I'm trying to get at. And obviously that's the case with this gentleman. And so Vic ends up reporting what happened on the news, and Vic calls Myra over the phone, and also tells her to see if the mayor's office can do anything about it. And she's like, the mayor is stone drunk. What is he gonna do about it? And then she ends up telling Vic, you asked me before why I want to run for mayor, why I want to expose myself to all of that scrutiny and misery and all of that, and this is the reason. And I do, and that's beautiful, and it is, it's actually the case of where she has good intentions. I haven't read this series in a long time, so that's why I don't actually remember all the details, but I remember how things turn out for Myra. in the end. And I know that she actually ends up in a situation very similar to the one that I just described for myself, where she, she's gonna have very good intentions. That it's not even because of her negligence. It's just she has good intentions and things go bad regardless, because sometimes that's just how it happens. But anyways, in this case, she has good intentions. I do sincerely wish that there were more politicians with sincere intentions, but also with a little bit of discernment to know that good intentions don't always get us to good places. I wish that there was a combination of that package to be politicians. Unfortunately, of course, that's a very difficult package to desire and to be even. So anyways, Myra tells him that that's why she's going to be the mayor, or she's going to run for mayor at least. And so Vic ends up going home. He talks to Tot one more time, and Tot tells him, you should stay in, like you're hurt from that fight earlier with the dog and with that bodyguard gentleman. But the question says, no, Baby Gun is still in town. I need to make sure that I stop him. He can't get away with killing people. And so he decides to go back to the gentleman that built the development. His name is escaping me now after I've set it up a whole bunch of times. And so he ends up going back to that guy's house, and when he gets there, he finds the guy dead. He had apparently poisoned himself because he couldn't take the fact that, Vic had announced on the news that that the ground was poisoned, and now everybody was moving out of the neighborhood. And so the question finds him dead. He moves a little further into the house, and he ends up finding Baby Gun there. And Baby Gun is eating ice cream, which is what what he always does, right? He breaks into people's houses and he eats ice cream. And Baby Gun reveals to him that he came to kill the guy, but the guy was already dead when he got there. And so he was like, well, let me help myself to some ice cream. And so the question asks him, oh, are you feeling a little sick from that ice cream? And Baby Gun's like, yeah, I actually do feel kind of sick from the ice cream. And so it's revealed that the gentleman who developed the suburb, he had actually poisoned the ice cream with rat poison, eaten it, and then that's how he had died. And then Baby Gun now is eating the same ice cream and basically collapses. And the question has this very harsh reaction to it, where Baby Gun asks, got any? And the question says, antidote? And then he says, his breath is coming in wet, ragged His breath is coming in wet, ragged gasps. His skin is tinging blue. He has only a few minutes left. Baby's too heavy to carry, but maybe the question can get him to a doctor in time anyway. Maybe not. Happy Halloween. And that's how the issue ends, with the question kind of not caring whether or not he gets Baby to a hospital in time before Baby dies. A little bit harsh, but understandably, Baby Gun is a psychopathic killer. So, all right. In closing, I have to say that personally, so far, that's been my least favorite of the issues of the question, but I am excited because I haven't actually reread it yet, but I was flipping through my book, and the next, I think it's 2 or 3 issues of the question are like one of my favorite storylines, and so I'm really excited for that. So I hope to talk to you guys soon. Anybody that's listened to this, I love you and I appreciate you. Have a good day.